Welcome to I Like Beer, the book club, where we discuss great books while drinking beer. It's that simple and that wonderful. I'm your host, Jeff Spanier. With me, the co-host of I Like Beer, the podcast, affectionately nicknamed The Talent, Jeff Riccitelli.
Yep, excited to be here and talk about this book.
And our book and beer friend, author Ryan Woldt.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here too. This book, this delves back into kind of my home region of the Midwest. So I'm excited that I related to a lot of these characters today.
I think he's going to like them. He can get grumpy with characters and he doesn't like them, but I feel already an affinity between Ryan and the people.
Well,
of
you
the
say
homeland.
that, but I left the Midwest, so who knows where I'm going to end up on this.
Fair enough. On the I Like Beer, the podcast, we've been releasing our best beer movie ever series and also enjoying some new beer releases and beers from the Central Coast. And you can check us out wherever you get your podcast, as well as I Like Beer, the podcast on Instagram. What have you been up to, Ryan?
I've been spending a lot of time drinking coffee and writing about coffee and getting ready for season 2 of the Roast West Coast podcast. So if anybody wants to go on another coffee journey for season 2, go to roastwestcoast.com and sign up with your email, and you'll get the podcast right in your email.
I've been enjoying my Libra coffee. I signed up for their delivery, and it's great stuff. And it's kind of pushing, kind of like I had to do with beer 15 years ago, push the envelope of what I'm comfortable with, trying some new stuff and enjoying it.
That's the exciting thing about coffee is that, coffee is kind of where craft coffee has been around a long time, but they're still at the beginning phase, the way craft beer was 10, 15 years ago, where we went from 1 or 2 great coffee shops to 10 to 15 to about, there's about 30 craft roasters here in San Diego County right now. So plenty to choose from.
And you're definitely in my head in the morning when I'm just used to scooping, pressing go. I think, no, I got to measure this out. Yep. It's got to be measured out correctly. Or I'll say, well, no, it's a French press morning. I've got the extra time. So you're in my head.
Well, that's what I should be in all of your heads, whoever's listening.
And we have got talent to enjoy a few coffee stouts and coffee ice cream. So you're coming along.
Yeah, I'm working my way there.
Well, I am going to be doing, maybe not in season 2, but I think in season 3, interviewing Mike Aquinas from Moster Brewing and Moster Coffee Roasters, and they have more than 120 beer coffee collaborations.
Oh, wow,
and he's the one who kind of organizes all of that for them. So that'll be fun.
Oh, very cool. I was just there last week. They got them all up on the wall. It's fantastic. Well, Jeff and I bonded years ago over our fondness for craft beer and shooting the crap. I guess I'm supposed to say telling stories.
Yeah.
In fact, we spent a lot of time drinking beer, talking about books, and we thought we're the only ones. And then we met Ryan and learned there was at least one more kindred soul. And apparently we all three love to hear ourselves talk, given the number of podcasts we're involved in. So we give you I Like Beer, the book club. And once a month we join our, and don't snicker this time, intellectual and literary powers to discuss a book, share a beer or two, usually 2, rotating the host based on who's chosen the book. And tonight it's Talent's turn. And the book is The Lager Queen of Minnesota by J. Ryan. And we were wondering if it's Stradal or Stradal. And we realized if he went from, probably when he was in the Midwest, it was Stradal. And now he's in LA, so it's probably Stradal.
Sounds about right, actually. Ryan is the same both in the Midwest and on the West Coast, though.
All right. But before we turn the page, let's find out what we're drinking and why. Jeff and I picked up our first beer, La Reina Lager from Rincon Brewery in Ventura, Carpinteria area, on our trip back from the Central Coast of California. It just seemed perfect. We were tasting the beers there and saw La Reina Lager, and we're reading the Lager Queen. It was just perfect. So, and not only that, when we tasted it, it was fantastic. So, Ryan, what do you think of this beer?
I've really enjoyed the first few sips. It's kind of got an ambery feel to it, and leaves a little tingle on my lips and my tongue even after I swallow. So I always appreciate that. I've never had anything from Rincon Brewery, so this is my first my first go around with these guys.
What do you, Talent? You're our Mexican lager expert.
I don't know about expert, but I've a fan of all Mexican lager. I actually really like it. I mean, obviously, Rincon, really cool brewery. If you're ever passing on the 101 there in Carpinteria on the way to Santa Barbara or further north, or if you're coming south to LA or San Diego, it's a great stop off. It's right there. And there's Rincon Brewing is there. And then also, I think Island Brewing, which is another one that are just kind of cool because it's a super small beach little community. So we went there and this, I think they do a really good job with this one. I mean, I think it's kind of you figure most places making Mexican lagers are going to make your traditional Vienna lager, or they're going to try and go for that amber, kind of that Dos Equis amber lager. So I think that's what their attempt is here. And I think they did a really good job. I think it's actually a little smoother than that. It's got a little more flavor even than that. And, it's a pretty, it's an easy drinking lager, but I think it's got a lot of flavor. And I like the fact that it's not kind of overboard in the caramel and that kind of stuff. I think it's a pretty smooth.
No, it's malt forward, but not that sweety kind of overdone caramelly that sometimes an amber could get in. I think it's great. And when we had it on tap, I thought my notes had said it was kind of creamy almost. Not out of it's an unfiltered beer,
right?
And it's only a week old, so we haven't aged this thing at all. It should be still nice and fresh, but I did think on tap it almost had a creaminess to it. I like it just as much this way, but it does taste a little different in the can, I think, if memory serves.
And I'm definitely enjoying it. I mean, the more I drink, it feels like it'll be gone before I realize it's gone.
Yes. So nice job.
We should start talking about a book.
Yes.
Sorry.
I think it's time. Cheers.
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 Talent,
why don't you tell listeners about this book?
Well, I mean, first of all, it was my time to pick a book, and I kind of I don't know what to pick. So I was kind of looking for like books that were coming out or people had talked about that, like, and obviously being book and beer, I saw Lager Queen, and that was pretty much, you had me at hello. And then, but then actually dug a little deeper and realized that Ryan Stradal, he actually dedicates his book to a Jeffrey Stradal. So then we kind of go, wait, that J could count for Jeff. So he's a Jeff. And then look at Ryan is the name he goes by. So, I mean, just from that alone, without even looking at the content of the book, we had to pick it and check it out. So read the book. And, the one thing I did like about this book, before we go too much deeper, but I definitely feel much lighter read than our previous two reads. I didn't have to stop periodically and really wrap my brain about what was going on here. This was what you read was what you get a lot of the ways through that, which was actually a little bit nice break. But basically, really, it just kind of boils down. It's just kind of a novel. It's about a family. I think it definitely Midwestern values. Ryan can say whether this is true or not, but Midwestern values of kind of hard work, and that kind of stuff really come through in this. It does have a really kind of, to me, kind of cool story of beer and even you could even say kind of the timeline of craft beer is kind of, worked through on this. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well. And at the core, at the beginning, it's two sisters, one farm, and kind of what happens from there. And I know that's their little tagline is 2 sisters, 1 farm.
2 sisters, 1 farm, but there's really a third character who's almost like the main character throughout the whole book. And the 2 sisters, their 2 sisters' story is almost her origin story. This third character, Diana.
Right.
And so that was interesting to me. When I first started reading, I read about Helen, who's, one of our main characters, and Edith, our other, the 2 sisters. And then there was a chapter labeled Diana, and I was like, well, who's this woman? Like, what's happening here?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it was a couple of things that just stood out to me right off the bat. And normally I don't necessarily notice this, but things that I noticed was just like the chapter titles on this, so the chapter titles were kind of, because they were all numbers and they were all like monetary numbers. And until after I think you read them, you even kind of realize maybe what the significance were of some of those numbers, or maybe you never even catch that. So I thought that was kind of an interesting setup. And then again, that you kind of, you're going down this path of these 2 sisters, and you're right. And then they just kind of threw in that third character who ends up kind of dominating the story down the rest of it, in some ways. So I did think that was kind of interesting. I don't know if that was, again, where you could have lengthened it out and maybe made that transition a little smoother. I don't know. I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on that.
Well, and the chapters didn't necessarily go chronologically either. They bounced around quite a bit as far, in general, pushing forward, but you'd be in 2003, you'd be in 2012, you'd be in 1967, and and they would go back and forth depending on where in the story we were taking. And so I thought that was, I didn't necessarily pay a ton of attention to that when I first started, and about halfway through I realized I was getting lost, so I had to go back and just go check the timeline that I was on.
I didn't think that was done. I mean, obviously it was done on purpose, but I didn't think it was sloppy. I think he put his time into saying, once he shifted gears on you, shifted time periods, he put enough cues in there in the first 2 or 3 paragraphs so you kind of could hit reset and say, okay, where am I? Oh, we're back onto this character story, or where are we at? We're in a whole different place and time. It didn't take too long. It was if I put the metaphor of shifting gears, there was a bit of a little grinding, but you're in gear pretty quickly. Yeah. I wrote down my notes that this is the historical fiction version of macro and micro beer in the United States. You know, if you don't want to sit down and read John Hole's Drink Beer, Think Beer and get the big picture textbook version, or the beer Bible, then this one will do it for you. I'll package it into a novel for you, and you'll get all the basics. Just the names are changed.
I did think he did a great job of capturing some of the personality traits stereotypically of Midwesterners, kind of some stoicism, a willingness to just not pursue confrontation, even if it means falling, even if it means a growing distance between two people, the willingness to work hard, and this idea that you get up and you go to work and that's what you do. And asking for help isn't necessarily the first thing you would do if you needed it. And also that you just, when things don't go your way, you just keep going. You pick yourself up and you keep moving forward, even when things are bad. And it's almost each of these characters, when they all work for everything they have, and yet when something good happens for them, it's like a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, well, what did I do to deserve this? They're almost, very unassuming in that way. And I thought he did a good job in that regard. And also in, he's a male author writing 3 female voices.
Right. And
2 of the female voices are grandmothers or older characters throughout their life. For most of the book, they're older. And that was a little difficult for me at first to try to understand that as the reader, to get into that mindset as well, because I don't spend a lot of time with grandmothers. Both of my
but you have written female voices.
But I have written female voices, and I thought that he did a good job of getting me from the very first chapter, where I was kind of like, okay, can I relate to this character at all, to a point where I started to understand. Yeah, I can see. I know this woman. I know this lifestyle. I understand this place that she's in, where near the late part of the book, the grandmother, who's 70 years old, is working like 3 different jobs, one of them at the local Arby's. And I understand, I know women like that. And I know what a big deal it is for a small town in the Midwest to get like the new fast food place or the new restaurant. When I was a kid, my family owned a restaurant, and I can remember very viscerally the excitement when we got an Applebee's, or it took 20 years to get an Olive Garden and there was lines out the door. It's still a big deal for the small Midwestern town, because these are things we kind of all we don't joke, but we see like the corporatization of our suburbs. There's the same restaurants at every major intersection. But all of those corporate companies have minimums on how big your town has to be in order for them to make it work. They won't come in, they won't even consider your town unless you have a certain population point. And often that number is between 70 and 100,000 people. And there's a lot of towns, especially in the Midwest, that are smaller than that.
So I did realize I've never eaten at an Arby's. Sorry about that. So I did realize I've never eaten at an Arby's, and I did realize how many Arby's are around.
I drive by one quite often on coming down, what is that, San Marcos Boulevard there is one there, but I have not. So I was saying that kind of at the beginning, they talked about this 2 sisters, 1 farm. It's basically a family farm that gets divided or unfairly split over an inheritance. how did you guys feel? You guys had any thoughts on how each sister reacted to the father's decision? You know, because I thought that was kind of interesting, because it was just like the decision was made, and then you can tell these two characters went their separate ways. But you know, it wasn't that it was really like, it doesn't at no point did they talk at all about during that time, or that lapse of time of that they ever tried to kind of talk about the situation, or you know, I mean, basically when it was done, it was done.
Ryan mentioned that some of those Midwest values or mannerisms, the avoiding confrontation, even at the risk or price, in this book, the price of not fixing or redeeming a relationship. Was that something that rang true to you, Ryan, in the book?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I have two brothers, one of whom I'm very close with, and one of whom I'm not as close with. And I'm also, coincidentally, I'm the executor of my father's estate. And so we've had these conversations of what happens, you know, if he passes away and there's, you know, money to be split. How do you do that so nobody's upset, or, you know, how it's fair? And I certainly have had relationships and have seen family relationships in my own family where there was some sort of, talking about money is generally uncomfortable as a rule, and it's only under extreme duress that we do it. And in those situations where there is some sort of dispute, it can be very complicated over who's, you know, the hierarchical roles of the family, the oldest sibling, or the, you know, the relative who's involved, who takes the lead on figuring that out. And in my mother's side of the family, there was, you know, concerns when, you know, who was going to take over the family farm. And there's also expectations. Right. And so, you know, there's a good chance that several of the children don't want to take over the farm if there's multiples.
Right.
You know, my aunt who did take over the family farm from my grandmother, now they're retiring and they have 7 kids, but none of them want to take over the farm. That's just not something they want to do. And so what do you do at that point? And also farming is more difficult now than it was, not more difficult physically, but it's more difficult to make a living than it was, you know, in the middle of the last century. And so I think that it definitely rang true. You know, I certainly know family members that have gone years without speaking to each other, even when they're at the same family wedding over some dispute that happened. And maybe they don't remember it. And it's not that either one of them are even angry about it anymore. It's just that one of them has to make the first move. And that can be it's definitely not, it's not frowned upon. It's just not normal for someone to be emotional, you know, to show their emotions.
It did seem like Stradal was swinging for the fences with like this family saga epic of tragedy and heartbreak and generation long war, Cain and Abel, but 2 sisters, you know, one gets the favor of the father and the other one has to go about her own direction. It seemed like a lofty goal when you're trying to balance it with grandmothers. It's a story of grandmothers baking,
right,
or making beer. Yeah, and it was a weird, I don't want to say contradiction, but paradox to me of this kind of like saga, grand saga, multiple decades story that's also supposed to be this very grounded, salt of the earth. I found that if I was to reread the book, that's something I would consider.
Yeah, I just, like I said, talking about that part of it, it kind of goes with a little bit what you're saying. What I kind of found interesting was, you know, later on in the story, you know, we find out that some of these monumental moments in Helen's life, actually Edith was responsible for it, right? Like the 6-pack on her birthday that she wanted more than anything. And Edith was, so I just found it interesting that they never, at any point in however many years that was, they didn't have time to just, that never came out. You know, you would have thought at the father's funeral, or, you know, something like that, there would have been at somewhere in that almost a scope of 50 years that they would have had a chance to maybe some of that would have got hashed out a little bit or whatever, but it was almost like cut off ties, and we didn't have anything to do until, you know, that moment when Helen walks into the brewery where Edith is working. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting, the way he handled it. I don't know that would play, maybe it does, but it just doesn't seem to me that that's how it would play out in real life. Over 50 years, you would have had some interaction. And somehow, somewhere that would have come out. Some third party would have come in and, well, you know, this is what really happened.
Actually, I have that written down as my hands down favorite twist of the book. 16-year-old Helen wanting a beer for her birthday, and parents being adamant no. And then there's the surprise 6-pack for her with a little note and a water and an aspirin. And we find out the secret source of, it's a very loving story when we find out, but reading it, I thought, this seems out of character for the father. I'm not buying this. The dad wouldn't do that. And it was something that stuck with me at the beginning of the book of, I don't like this. That's not how this father would work. That mother would never allow. And then to find out that the trick was on me too. I really enjoyed that. That was my favorite part of the book.
Sure. And I would say to the talents point, that I can see very easily where you could go 50 years without communicating, because think about our last year in this pandemic and how all of a sudden a year passed and you're kind of shocked. My brother just celebrated his birthday and I gave him a call and I realized the last time we spoke on the phone was on his birthday last year. And it's not because we're at odds or anything. It's just, we've got different lives in different sides of the country, and
time flies.
Time flies. And since we were still in the beginning here talking about things that are Midwest, there was a line I wanted to read before we get too far along that is from the very beginning of the book, that really to me exemplified Edith as a character and also the Midwest, which was page 20 or so. Edith would just as soon take another woman's husband as another woman's pie recipe, and she had the best husband in the world, so there you go. And that was very much a, I am happy in my life and I'm happy in my situation, but I have this, there's definitely and this idea of you pull yourself up, you're always willing to lend a hand, but it's on you and it's your responsibility to create something. And so she would never take another woman's pie recipe. I think there's plenty of sitcoms that have joked about these great family recipes that end up coming from the side of the, Nestle chips, package or something, but that would never happen in the Midwest. It just wouldn't. And recipes are a big deal. My mom has passed down recipes for things like apple crisp and banana bread. And I've taught myself to make those, not because I'm especially good at baking, but because someone's got to keep making them. And, of course, now that I'm a vegetarian, some things have had to get modified, but so on. But I thought that there was a lot of little points where I just made little check marks and I would write like, so Midwest, and I wrote one a little bit later on when they were going to college. Helen was going to college and they were talking about college as being either a place to go to meet, a husband, or a place to go to actually learn. And I made a note about how that was definitely a mindset, a few generations ago, in our region. And also I wrote how much of like that idea of getting into college merely as a dating pool is a mindset, or as kind of the way they were raised, in saying, hey, well, we're going to send you to this, good school, but it's because you're going to meet somebody who's going to get a good job, as opposed to, why don't you go and learn and make something of yourself, which Helen was clearly motivated to do.
I remember back when we were called, so Jeff and I when we were in college, I remember they used to make the joke about the MRS degree. Yeah. Oh, she's just looking for an MRS degree.
Right.
And that, I don't think you couldn't say that anymore, but I mean, I don't think it's a thing anymore, but it was just, that was something back then. It was just, I want to meet Mr. Right, that, so I thought that was very interesting. I think the thing I liked about Edith, and I think it's kind of a throwback, and it's something that maybe it's hard for people nowadays to grasp, is that, she had a simple life and she was okay with that. And she was very happy with that simple life. She didn't really, whereas Helen was the opposite, was always striving for that, what we would typically talk about, kind of that materialistic, it's all about consumerism and getting the next and going to the next level and going. I thought Edith was kind of refreshing in that part of her character, but she worked very hard for it and worked her entire life for that. So it just was kind of an interesting kind of dichotomy between those two characters.
There was a quote from their mother, the mother and father of these two characters that end up putting this story, Helen and Edith, into work. Their parents. The quote about her mother was, her mom carefully selected her memories to reflect her established opinions, and it turned her mind into a bowl of lettuce she believed was a salad. and I was thinking about the two parents. Almost they reminded me of, the Grant Wood painting, the American Gothic, the farmer with the pitchfork and the stoic woman next to them, in the way they express themselves and their short responses, and the father getting grumpier and more awful as he got older. I thought that quote hit home. I could picture that character, just that quote, put that whole mother into tune for me.
I don't want to change the subject too far, but I do think at some point we should explain to our listeners, if there are any. I know that my wife is not one of them, so I'll just say this loud enough for her to hear. But Edith is famous for her pie baking at a very young age. She wins a pie baking competition, and I think that's an important thing to know throughout this book.
Right.
And Helen, from on the other side of things, at a very young age, gets extremely passionate about beer from the very first time that she tries it, and knows, almost immediately, even if she doesn't really understand what she's thinking, that she wants to be involved in beer, whether it's making it or being part of that culture. And we don't learn right away, but we do learn later on that Helen is the more competitive of the two, at least viscerally. And at one point she was going to try to take on pie making, and was discouraged in doing that by her mother, because pie making was Edith's thing. And she didn't want her to compete with her sister and beat her. And I wondered sometimes while reading this book, if she would have been allowed to make that pie that one day, how her life's trajectory could have changed. Maybe she would have won that blue ribbon for pies and never gotten into beer. And I thought that was a real tipping point of their personal stories.
And what the mother understood was Helen would make a better pie. She had no doubt that Helen would make a better pie than Edith, but that was Edith's thing. What she knew was Helen then would have conquered pies and moved on, but Edith would have been destroyed.
Right.
And that was the first, what I thought, nurturing maternal instinct I saw out of that mother.
Right.
I thought that was really...
The daughter didn't recognize it for that value. She saw it as being this terrible thing that had happened to her.
Right.
Not understanding the motivation of the mother.
It does occur to me, thinking back to what you just said about the two characters, the one that she bakes pies, she's always baking them for others, whether they're in a retirement home or, she's baking for someone else to bring pleasure to. She says she doesn't even eat the pies, even though they're the best pies, but she makes them for others to bring pleasure and happiness to them. People should have a good piece of pie. That's brought up several times. Helen makes beer like a competitor, to make the best beer. And I think the author laughs at her macro beer at the time she's making it in the 60s and 70s. It is the beer that everyone drinks. So she's going to make the best beer. For her, it's a competition to be the best at something. And for Edith, it's about bringing pleasure, substance to others.
Yeah. It's that comfort and providing for others versus winning.
Mm-hmm.
And I did like that the author recognized the difficulty of making a really good macro beer consistently every time, which is actually really a difficult thing. Right. And, it's not to say that they're the beer that I want to drink every time, but the consistency with some of our nationwide's big brewers make the same lager over and over and over is truly incredible. And a lot of that did originate in this region, in the Midwest, mostly in Wisconsin. This book's obviously set kind of on the border of Wisconsin and Minnesota. But a lot of those originated there and have actually spread throughout the country. You can trace those roots here in San Diego. Carl Strauss only exists because their uncle was the head brewer at Pabst Blue Ribbon in Milwaukee. Yeah. Examples like that. You hear a lot in sports about coaching trees. One coach has a bunch of assistants who go off to do great things. Brewing is a lot like that too, where, one great brewer can create generations of great brewers below him as they work their way up.
Yeah, to talk a little bit about the beer part of it, I actually found a lot of, that's where I think there were times throughout this book where I kind of laughed out loud at just some of the humor, and a lot of it was around the beer part of it. And so there was the initial start about the macro, but I actually thought it was, well, first thing was how believable was it that Helen like instantly loves beer on her first taste. Like she becomes a mad woman for beer, like searching out beer everywhere on first taste. I don't know how many people have ever had that on their first taste.
I have.
Have you?
That
Okay.
I marked that as that's exactly how I felt it and my father's passed, so you can't CPS cannot be called on him. But at probably 8 years old, 7 years old, that's exactly what I thought. Her whole response to like there's angels singing and her head hits the back of the wall and she's like, what is happening to my tongue and to my mouth? And the bitters and the sweets, that's all. And then 100% got that.
That's awesome. And then I love the fact where she's like talking with I think the boys, where she's starting to Orville and all that kind of stuff, and he explains that he had Coors as his first beer, and at the time, like, you could not get Coors anywhere. Watch Smoking the Bandit, you'll understand more about that. But and her quote is, "You had Coors as your first beer?" She said, "This may have been the most impressive thing a man had ever said to her." Like I said, I laughed out loud when I read that one. I thought, what a great line, and just kind of a great way to tie that into the book. And like you said, it's almost like a fictional or historical fiction of the history of beer. So there was a lot of those throughout there, and we can kind of, as we get into talking maybe about Diane more, hit on a couple of those. But I just thought that was kind of fun. That was really cool how he brought in the macro beer and that kind of a thing. But also made it somewhat humorous in points and stuff. So
allow me to read the quote when she has her first taste of beer.
Yeah.
Because this is where our author leans in. This is something he knows a thing or two about, I'm guessing. If he's a teetotaler and I'm wrong, I'll eat my hat. She leaned her sweaty head against the wall of the shed and felt the beer hit her tongue. Whoa, she thought. Her body flickered with a fear that had nothing to do with her family's warnings or Chelsea or anything she'd ever known or imagined. She felt it in her mouth, behind her eyes, in her blood, in places no one had touched. It wasn't just because she was doing something she wasn't supposed to be doing or suspected it would lead to her finally making out with Chelsea. She was scared because it felt good. Yeah, I recognize that response to a first taste of a beer.
Yeah, no, I thought that he did a really, like I said, I really enjoyed those pathways and just how his description of beers, but also people's reactions to beers, and so it's very, very interesting. So transitioning a little bit, we've talked a bunch about Helen and Edith. Let's talk about Diana, because we said she becomes kind of the focal, character and when we first meet her, she's not a very sympathetic character. She's stealing tools from garages and selling them to make money and so on. So, at what point or how does she become kind of this sympathetic character that then, because of that sympathy that the gentleman with Frank takes on, her under his wing and brings her into this world of craft brewing?
I don't know that she was ever super unsympathetic though either. She's a high school student who's poor, and I actually made a note about it. She is stealing tools, and her friend is selling them on eBay for her, but she's using that money to pay bills for her grandmother, who's now been widowed, and she's living with her grandmother after losing her own parents. And so while she's not a sympathetic character, she's kind of a tough, hard-nosed, I'm going to figure it out on my own character, even if it's not the right thing to do. I mean, on page 96, it says, Diana didn't enjoy being a thief, but come to think of it, she didn't know anyone except maybe Andrea who enjoyed their jobs. And unlike any other second job she could have taken, because she was working at the time in a coffee shop as well, it didn't make her have to cut back on her shifts at the coffee shop, which I thought was a really interesting thing, because she's 16 years old and she was more worried about losing her shift at the coffee shop than she could have been worried about her schoolwork or her, extracurriculars, going to jail, but she wasn't. And I made a note just at the bottom, and I said, I don't know that I'm smart enough to get into all the nuances of this. I think we covered a lot of it when we talked about Hillbilly Elegy, but there's something to be said about the poor being forced into crime because they're being held back in other areas of their life. And this was an opportunity she had, and she needed $90 to get her mom's car out of the pound because it had broken down and had been towed, and so she did what she felt she had to do, and that leads her eventually, to getting caught by a local brewmaster named Frank, who, despite his initial instinct that she was, some punk kid doing a bad thing, actually takes the time to learn more about her
Right.
and her story, and gives her an opportunity to work off, the theft in his brewery. And I thought that was a really great thing. I think that's something that I don't know if that still happens. I'd like to think that it does, but it made me think of how that one moment, that was her moment, where we had our moment with Edith and Helen and their mother, telling Helen not to make the pie. This is Diana's moment. Her entire life, she's just won a national merit scholarship. She's obviously smart. We know that. But she's got bad grades because she's working 2 jobs and she's not committed to school. And she gets caught stealing, and she could go one of 2 ways. He could turn her into the police, or she could continue down that path of doing things just to get by. But instead, she's given an opportunity. And as we see through the next, couple hundred pages, she makes the most of it. She grabs on. And in the beginning, it's only because she feels a little bit of guilt, but also she feels reward in the work itself. She's just going to keep working, even if she doesn't really understand what it is. She doesn't have Helen's same immediate passion for beer. What she ends up having a passion for is the work and the community that surrounds it. And I thought that was a really unique moment.
She's really a blend of Helen and Edith. She has the artisanship of Edith, and once she learns how to make beer, cares about the beer. And Frank teaches her a lot of that, about you don't put a beer in front of people you're not proud of. That isn't a work of art. But then she has Helen's drive when it comes time to be a business person on her own, when she will eventually have the opportunity to strike out on her own.
So what did you guys think? I 100% agree with you. And I think it was really cool, that moment. Right. And you would hope it's not like Frank just made the choice or decision, kind of willy nilly. He did some research and said, I talked to nobody would say a bad thing about you, all this kind of stuff. So he did the research and said, yeah, this kid is worth, kind of taking this shot on, and I feel they've got that work ethic that they're going to follow through on it. But what'd you think of his education? I thought that was another part I flagged, where he puts the 4 beers, and he says, drink this one today, drink this tomorrow. And it's what is it? Bell's Hop Slam. Oh no, Pliny the Elder was the first one, because she says, I want to learn about beer. And he says, what do you know? And she's like, nothing. He's like, oh, I envy you. And so the next day she shows up to work, and there's a paper bag, and it's Diana Education. And it has today, Pliny the Elder. What is it? Tomorrow, the Alchemist's Heady Topper. Day after that, oh no, that was the Hop Slam. And then that was Heady Topper was the day after tomorrow. And then the final one day was Dogfish Head's 90-minute IPA. So that was pretty cool on, how the guy, that he did that. He took that time. And like I said, again, there's your research that the author put in, because what an education.
My note on that page, literally right below where it says Dogfish Head 90-minute, was labeled, "Figure it out, you dingus." I wrote, I like Frank. Yeah. That's all I wrote.
Yeah, no, he was hard. He was hard nosed. I mean, how many times did he make her beer until
24 times?
Yeah, 24 times. But he said, it was ready by 14. I could have sold it, but then you wouldn't have had a store, And so he was like that tough love, that hard, guy and guy. But I did enjoy his character, and you can see he did bring out the best of her and made her that artisan of craft beer.
And that's a luxury that Frank had, though, in order to have her dump that kind of product. And that's something that you see less and less because of the cost of doing business. Right. I've mentioned, I don't know if I've mentioned this on this show, but when somebody was hired to work at our family restaurant when I was a kid, they would spend no less than 40 hours one-on-one training, with my dad and our managers, to learn everything from how to carry a plate to what the products were to tasting everything, before they were ever, given an opportunity to go out and act as a server, or a bartender, or waiter. But now there's just not that kind of opportunity, because to get that kind of training, labor costs have gone up, the costs across the board have gone up. And at that time, right or wrong, they were getting paid a very, very low minimum wage. And so they took the hit on the front end where they worked a couple of weeks for almost no money. But on the back end, they had a full education of what they were doing. So and not only in that they knew what they were doing, they learned to take pride in it, as opposed to just being like, okay, it's your first day. Here's an hour or two of like how to do things. You're off on your own. And then it's up to you to find that intrinsic pride. But when you have that kind of training and you have to work for it, you end up appreciating it because you know what goes into it.
Right.
Which Diana clearly got.
I could see that. In fact, Jeff and I have a brewer friend who trained a lot of our local young brewers, Mark Purcell of Oceanside Brewing, so Oceanside Ale Works. And so I saw that ringing true, but really with the character Diana and Frank and their interactions, that was a part of the book that I had I just had to say, okay, this could happen. And I had to let it go. The author's strings when he says, oh, you don't know what beer tastes like. And then he just happens to, and then he lines up this all-star lineup in front of her because people in Minnesota have those sitting in their fridge, ready to roll and share with a 16-year. You know what? I got a bottle of Pliny the Elder. I'm giving it to a 16-year-old who can't appreciate my IPAs yet, but that's where that bottle's. So that, and then Frank's a kind of role reversal of being this person that says, young lady, you deserve a chance, to being this absolutely ball buster, tough guy. I just had to play along in that little part. That was a little rough for me. I really thought the author did a great job with Helen, and he can write grandmas, and maybe it's because I teach teenagers, and some of that was just not ringing as true to me, and it seemed forced, I guess is what I'm saying. But I got through it.
3 Franks in my own life. So yeah.
It wasn't that Frank didn't seem true to me. It just seemed like there were 3 different Franks in the book.
Sure.
And I wasn't really sure why Frank kept shifting, and then the relationship between them seemed kind of, let's rush through this, and we're going to put this all-star lineup. And same thing other times in the brew house when someone say, well, we don't have that, but let me read in the fridge, and then they pull out a beer. I'm like, really? You just had that sitting in the fridge? Yeah. You had one of those just sitting there?
Well, you do know that people in the Midwest drink more beer per capita than anywhere else in the world. It's not completely unreasonable that they would have beer laying around. I did think that. I do agree with you that it would be unlikely that you would give someone those beers as your first. But Frank kind of felt like that character who he's that little piece. He's the connecting piece. He's not necessarily, his story is not the important part of the story, but he's the one who's going to help us transition Diana from, the aimless, kid making mistakes to the motivated adult going out on her own path. And he's her Obi-Wan.
I guess that's what I felt was the deus ex machina of the we need Frank to make these things happen. Enter Frank. These things have happened. And it just felt a little like you could see the wheels turning and the strings pulling, but that's okay. It didn't wreck the story for me, but it seemed less organic than the grandma Cain and Abel story.
Little choppier.
Yeah.
So then, I think we're at a point right now where we probably should have another beer.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to let Ryan, I'm not sure how he got this for us, but very excited to try this.
Well, there was a lot of greasing of palms and meeting people in alleys.
Yes.
No, it's much simpler than that. New Glarus Brewing Company is a very well-regarded brewery in South Central Wisconsin. Deb Carey is the owner and in charge of that operation. And they made a decision several years ago that they were not going to distribute, even though they were popular. They were a very popular local brewery, and they had the opportunity to distribute their beer, to other states or even bigger. And they said that we're having such a hard time keeping up with demand here in Wisconsin that we're just going to say we're going to max capacity here in this place. And they were making good beer. And so they became more in demand because you can only get them within the confines of one state. Beyond their core beer, they also have a fruit beer selection, which is this particular beer is New Glarus Brewing Company Raspberry Tart. is the one that I'm drinking right now. And I don't know, do you guys both have that, or do you have a Belgian Red?
I have a
the
Belgian
raspberry
Red,
Tart.
and I have not been so excited about a beer in quite a while.
Me neither.
So the idea is that they use almost all Wisconsin ingredients, and the berries, these are fruit ales. The berries are all from Wisconsin, and one of the things that comes with that, Wisconsin obviously has some fairly up and down weather, is sometimes the berries don't come in, and then they don't make the beer. And so then a whole season will go by in which you don't have these beers. Wisconsin Belgian Red was kind of their first and became their most famous. I always call it a Sunday morning beer. It's the beer you drink for breakfast on Sunday morning as kind of a celebration of the week. And very, very fruit forward. I mean, when you pour it out, you'll see that you can't even see through it. It's so dark red color. Not that it's hazy or cloudy. It's just such a dark red with a nice little head on it. But when they started with the Belgian Red, which is cherries, which come from Door County, Wisconsin, when a couple of years there was no cherry crop, the weather just did not cooperate, and there was no cherry crop. So instead of going and buying cherries somewhere else, they just didn't make the beer. And everyone panicked. Everyone freaked out because once a brewery starts making a beer, you just kind of assume you'll always have access to it. And that didn't happen. So they started expanding out, and they made this raspberry one, and they have a mixed berry one with strawberries. And occasionally they'll do an apple one, which is also fantastic. But they're very hard to get. And I am lucky that my family has it. And sometimes they're willing to schlep them 3,000 miles across the country for me.
Thank you so much for sharing. And cheers.
Yeah,
I got to get a picture of this moment on so cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, that works.
And it's every bit as good as I had hoped it would be. And people are going to hear this that know me well and saying, you're drinking a Belgian Red with cherries. 3 things you are not normally going to associate. Although I've been making progress with my Belgian drinking. I really have. I'm coming right along. But it's delicious.
So there's a quote on my bottle, which is the raspberry tart. And it's Daniel Carey is the head brewer, Deb Carey's husband at the brewery. And it's, some people paint, some sing, others write, I brew. And the New Glarus Brewery, if you ever have a chance, is in the town of New Glarus, just south of Madison, Wisconsin. And it's they underwent a large renovation a couple of years ago, and it's this beautiful old farmland property, and a really great brewery to go check out.
Yeah, I have the raspberry tart as well. It is fantastic. It's very jammy.
Yes,
but it's delicious and super smooth finish. It's not. It's got a little bit of tartness to it, but not over at anywhere. Compared to a lot of sours.
No, definitely not like a sour.
No,
but
it's fantastic the way they did it. It just really balanced it out. The fruit,
And I think I gave you that raspberry tart on accident. I was planning on giving. I think I grabbed 2 what I thought were Belgian Reds.
Oh, okay.
And the reason I did was because this book, when they talk about Edith's rhubarb pie in a bottle near the end, which is Edith's, she's in her late 70s and she's made her first beer and it's getting a lot of attention. I think it's based off of this series of beers. Yeah. And he actually does thank the Careys of New Glarus Brewing in his notes at the end of the book.
Confirmed.
Along with a bunch of other breweries as well. But this would be the most famous from that region of this particular kind of stuff.
Well, I'll wait for the next bottle.
Yeah, no problem. We'll work something out.
But yeah, no, it's really, really good.
You guys always do your on your I Like Beer podcast. You rate beers for Untapped. Where does this fall on your list?
I can tell you where the Belgian Red stands, and this is the highest acclaim, which I'm stubborn to give. But this is a Shawshank beer, and that's I can't even imagine how good it must be off the tap, because this is amazing.
Yeah, no, I would agree too. I like I said, I put it right off the bat, and I'm like first sip, I'm like, it's a 5. I go, wait, slow down, take a couple more sips, and I would put it as a 5. This is one of those beers that's on the list that hey, you have to try this at some point. When people are asking, what beers do I have to try? I think it's fantastic. It's delicious and it's really well made. Yeah, no, I would agree with you.
So I'm not allowed to drink this beer without my wife.
Ah,
So I had to, she's still at work, so I had to pour half of this one into a glass so that when she's done with work, she'll
let
be,
it
she'll
breathe
be
a little
able to
bit.
have
You know,
it.
I bet you
Yeah,
this is one of those ones too. Is as it warms up even more that fruit comes out, and
Yep.
so I'm gonna I've had about half of it. I'm gonna let a little bit sit for a little bit here and see what happens as it warms up too.
Oh, I am sold. I can't wait to try the other.
Like I honestly, I never thought that I would ever need to go to Wisconsin, but I honestly will make a trip to Wisconsin now to go to New Glarus.
You know who's been selling us on a trip to Wisconsin? Friend of the show, Brian Ketterer.
That is true. Actually, he has. So I guess
they do mention another brewery in Wisconsin that would be on that list of places to go in the book here, which is Central Waters Brewing, which is a phenomenal.
Nope. No, I'm not leaving New Glarus. I'm parking my trailer right out front.
No, it's
so
fantastic.
I can be there every moment.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. You brought up the distribution thing. I thought it was interesting to even in the book and got a little bit of a feel or a taste of people trying to distribute craft beers, like the guys that are driving around with it in the back of their car, and they're just going to every place and trying to, and it's like, hey, it's a good day. We offloaded a case, or, I've got this. And I thought it was also very interesting how they, despite the fact that, they're trying to make it and make money too, though, but they had standards on who they would sell their beer to, right? Yeah. That place doesn't clean out their beer lines, or, that place, the stuff they have is too old. So I thought that was very well done. Like, again, if you're trying to talk about historical fiction of craft beer, I thought that was interesting. And I thought there was a lot of that stuff through the second half of the book, the point where they talked about Helen's company, and they bring in the IPA, and all these guys are like, that's not beer. What is this? And they're like, well, do we make the investment or not? And they didn't, and obviously it was devastating to them. But I thought that was interesting. You get a little side of that as well, because you think pretty much every macro brewery has had to make that decision at some point, and they all handle it different ways. And they talked in here a little bit about how some did it with certain products. But I thought that was interesting. I thought that was really fascinating. Going back to the parts that made me laugh, there was, I think, I put on page 200 where she walks in somewhere, and I think she was buying her Volkswagen Golf, and she didn't want to negotiate, so she was trying to get a feel of who the guy, like for the guy that she was going to bargain with or whatever. And she just asked him, she goes, what kind of beer do you have? And that's what she said. She was now a person who judged people by what kind of beer they have in their fridge. I think we can all relate a little bit to that now, because we've spent enough time around the beer and thing and stuff, that we do kind of judge you a little bit on what kind of beer you have in your fridge. Like I said, those are the points in this book that just made me kind of smile or go, I'm enjoying this book.
I love the idea of you walking into a brewery run by grandmothers. Yeah. I love the idea of the grandmothers. I want to make a beer I'd like. Yeah. And they're like, no, IPAs sell. And I'm like, nope, I don't like IPAs. I'm not making an IPA. I'm making a plum pie or whatever. And then crafting that beer down and then insisting people sample it. You just picture the grandmother saying, no, please try mine. No, try mine. And then they find their one person that likes their beer, and that's all they needed.
Right.
That was the one I was looking for.
I was just saying, like, that was the example with the ghost, right? That the lady's making that, and she didn't want it to be sour, so she makes it her own way. And it's like the one guy that's like he says, I love it. It's so different than anything else I'll have. I'll take everything you got, and so it's just kind of cool. Like I said, those little quirks and things that happen within and you can kind of see that's how sometimes when you go to certain breweries, you see that beer that's just, why did they think of making that? It's just to have something different or something unique.
Well, there was an interesting transition from Helen and Edith's era, Helen in particular with Blott's beer, to Diana, who is their niece, and her craft brewery, which was the tastes of drinkers and the loyalty of drinkers has changed. And that's something we see a lot in the industry, and in my time in the beer industry as well. There was a time where you found that beer that you liked, a Blott's or a Schlitz or a Pabst or whatever, and that was your beer. Everyone knew that was your beer. There was brand no loyalty. Difference. That brand loyalty was so important. And then in what you were just talking about, where we're following our beer rep, who becomes Diana's husband, and the father of her child, around on a day selling beer, that was very accurate to me. I've done those days. And, but also not only just knowing that, but also knowing that your audience has changed. It's not so much about brand loyalty. It's about what have you done for me lately?
Right.
You know, what kind of new stuff do you have? And, you know, as somebody who writes about beer and who's worked in that industry, there's a lot to be said for in my personal life, being able to just drink the same beer. I was the beer buyer for a place here in San Diego for a couple of years, and I eventually trained someone else to take on that job, even though I was still there. And beer buying comes with a certain cachet and you know, respect in that industry if you're good at it and work at it. And the first week that she was in charge of the beer buying was the most relaxed I had been in 2 years, because all I did was drink Sierra Nevada pale ales all week instead of, you know, sampling one
Right.
of the 30 different beers that came across the bar that week. And it really is, the industry has grown so much that, I mean, it would not be out of line to think that there'd be 30 new beers for me to try every single week.
Yep.
And as a drinker, that's fantastic. But as a small local craft brewery, you know, you want to be the one whose beer hits, but then you're always trying to go for that home run swing. And that's something Diana was dealing with that Helen didn't have to deal with during her successful time with her larger brewery,
Right.
making the one
Mhm.
local cheap beer for hardworking people. But as the market changed, she didn't adapt fast enough.
Right.
And
No,
it
we
would
did.
have been inauthentic. You know, it's, you know, Pabst Blue Ribbon is a great example of a brand that's no longer being run by the same people. It's just a brand now, but that is trying to do more craft like things. And they never really
Yeah.
hit because it doesn't seem to fit with who they've been for 70, you know, 80 years.
And they talked about a little bit, like if we tried to throw out Blott's IPA, no one's going to buy it, you know, and that's the same thing. If you had Coors IPA or Bud IPA, no one's going to buy that, you know? So I thought that was pretty authentic.
And also the big breweries, the big macro breweries coming in saying, which of these little breweries can we just
Right.
take?
Yeah.
And you know, that we certainly saw plenty of that going on our brewery travels.
Right.
We get to a brewery and they think, you know who they're owned by now.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're like, no, we
you
didn't. They did a good job of hiding that from us.
Yep. There was something about, I don't know if it was in the book itself or in the notes after the book, but that the author was talking about how Midwestern towns are more willing to support their local brewery. And that to me is kind of a lot of the Midwest is populated by people from Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and kind of that region of Europe. Wisconsin and Minnesota in particular are German and Polish and Norwegian. But those are also areas that are known for their neighborhood breweries. And as an example of that, there's a town in Germany, Landwehr is the name of the town, which is where my family is from. We're related to Landwehrs. And they own the Landwehr Brewing Company. And they also own the Landwehr Restaurant and the Landwehr Hotel. And they're the only beer that has been in that town for 200 years. Right. And I had a chance to go there and visit. And you literally could not buy another beer because no one else was willing to compete with the local brewery. And then I had their beer, and unfortunately, it was not what I was hoping for. But the people in that town had been drinking the same beer for 200 years. And,
Right.
and you could either drink the yellow version or the dark version. That's what they offered you when you came in. And so there's something to be said for towns latching onto their local brewery because it's got their name in it. You know, it's Summit Brewing is Summit County in Minnesota, or the New Glarus, like we're drinking right now, is that town of New Glarus is a few thousand people, but that's their brewery.
Right.
Oh, well, they're lucky people.
They are lucky people. Well, and I think what you're talking about too is a little bit of, that where you were talking about having 30 new beers. That's such a sign of the times. We are such a kind of short attention span society now, right? Everything's moving so quick and so fast. You're seeing it happen in the beer industry. But I think you also have to have, and you do have, I think, people that are loyal to their local, their local, I won't say pub because it's not necessarily a pub here, but brewery and that kind of stuff. But and I think that's important because without that, we're going to lose those local ones, and I think that there's a good chunk of people that are aware of that. You've seen that, especially in the pandemic, that push and that, to buy local and support your local. But I think we are we talked about a lot on our podcast that we are so blessed to live in an area with so many options and opportunities. But there's a balance, right? You got to find that balance where, because if you get too many, you're going to lose something. And that's also part of that as well, is making sure you continue to support local and those ones that are doing it well. But at the same point, you have all these opportunities to try out, new ones and everything else with it. So it is kind of interesting. I guess maybe kind of start to tie it up a little bit, but let's take the title of the book. Who do you think at the end, who is the Lager Queen of Minnesota? Is there a Lager Queen of Minnesota?
They're all the Lager Queen of Minnesota. Helen, Edith, Diana. Yeah, I struggled with that too.
They're the goddesses, right? It's Artemis Brewing at the end, and they are the goddesses. Yeah. There was that, Helen at the end trying to do her best in her limited way of thinking about how you redeem yourself, and there was that Breaking Bad moment where she shows up with a duffel bag full of cash.
Yeah.
Like, wait, she's a 70-year-old woman. She's showing up Walter White style with dropping off a duffel bag of cash. No, I think I think it's that they're all the queen. They're all the goddesses of beer.
Yeah. They all had different stories, but they all ended up being connected through this one kind of particular product. Whether it was beer or whether it was pies or whatever, they all ended up kind of in the same place. And I actually really liked the very ending, where Helen and Edith are reunited, because I also have seen on that side of things, family members who have been separated for years and years and years come back together. And it's generally because it's just that stepping over the threshold is always the difficult part. And, all three of these women are going to be leading lives that are inherently different for whatever time they have left, because somebody finally did that. And it took being pushed to the limit to get there, but they did. I was curious, do you guys have any interest in rating these books the way you guys do with beer?
Yep.
No.
Unless the author's here with us, because I would feel terrible.
Yeah. No, I think it's
nothing
good,
if not honest.
Yeah, to go to an overall opinion of the book. I think that's actually a good
I think let's start.
We're in the Yelp society now too, right? People look for that and they want to do it. Should I read this book? So
yeah,
there you go. So
I feel kind of like, yeah, you did. Are we going to give it a number, or what's our ranking scale? Are we going to put our thumbs out sideways and lift them up or down?
No, I've got to use the same rating system, 1 through 5 with 0.25s increments. Yeah. I can't have two rating systems. I'm an English teacher.
Right.
I'll be confused. So I'll be wandering around the studio lost.
Let's lay that out right now. So if it's a 1 through 5, but are you rating it just in books in general, or are you rating it within its category? Because that changes the dynamic a little bit too, right? So
you get to give your disclaimer for your score.
All right.
How about that? Does that clean it up easy?
That makes it easy enough. I think we can.
Okay. Well, here we go. Who's first?
All right. I'll go first since I picked it. I would give this book, out of a score of 1 through 5, I would give it a solid. I'm going to be right at a 4, because that's what I tend to give almost all the beers I like and enjoy. I think it's not great literature. But and I'm going to steal your word for it, Jeff. So hopefully it wasn't. It's comfort food. I liked your when you told me that about that, and I do feel like it's a book that it's an easy read. I didn't have to sit there like the Overstory or what was the last one we read, and
Slaughterhouse 5,
and stop for moments and go, okay, what did I just read? Okay, let me rethink about this, or how did I? So I did enjoy the characters. Like I said, it made me laugh out loud, which for me, any book that does that is definitely going to be in the 4 category. I think it's not, like I said, it's not great literature. I think it's one of those things that if you're looking for something to just blow your mind, it's not going to be there. But I think it's a good read, and I would recommend it to most people and say, hey, you'll enjoy this. You'll find something in here you'll enjoy, whether it's just the story of the family, the sisters, the beer, that kind of thing. It has a happy ending, which sometimes doesn't happen in literature. And I think for most of us, we can use more happy endings.
Nicely done.
All right. I'm going to jump in and say that, first of all, since you guys don't know my rankingness, we've never ranked anything together, that I'm a bit of an extremist in that I will never rank anything a 5 ever unless it's truly life-changing.
Okay.
That's important to know. I had to stop doing things like Yelp reviews because of that. because I realized that I was actually hurting places I
Yes.
liked, because Yelp is so heavy. It's either a 5 or a 4 or nothing,
Right.
you know, and it's like, well, then why have the other numbers? But for me, I always thought a 3 was pretty damn good.
Yeah.
But I would give this, I'm very, very similar to you. I would give it a 3.75. I don't think it would quite get into that. I'm definitely going to recommend it, you know, category. I would say if somebody said, hey, what do you think about the book? I'd say, yeah, give it a shot. It'll be a good, you know, you'll burn through it. If you're from the Midwest or you're into brewing and beer, it's definitely, I thought, pretty accurate. He did a good job of relaying that. I wondered a few times if he came from the beer industry or not, but I don't think that he did. It looks like he interviewed quite a few brewers and, you know, maybe did some ride-alongs or hung out in the brewery. So I thought that was really, really well done. And
Not bad work
but
if you can get it.
yep. But again, I think we were talking about it earlier. Like, there's definitely some moments of like, okay, well, this thing has to happen, so we're just going to create a situation where it happens, even if maybe it, you know, with Frank being like the catalyst for certain things in Diana's life or certain actions. But it'd be one that I'm gonna you know, I'll pass on to someone else and hope they enjoy it, but I'm not gonna to worry about it. And I probably won't pick it up again.
I'm going to echo that. 3.75. Comfort food. It's like a slice of pie. It's like a good glass of beer, but it's not Edith's pie, and it's not New Glarus, Wisconsin Belgian Red. But I'm happy I read it. I enjoyed it. I had places where I chuckled. I had places where I awed. There were a couple places that tugged at the heartstrings. There are characters that I really thought were well developed, and I liked his goal of a great family saga paralleled by the American story of beer. And I think they were lofty goals and a solid, if I wrote the book, I'd be proud I wrote the book. Right. But it's for me, the 4 where I draw a line for a 4 for a book is it on my reread? Because I am a big rereader. This is not on a reread book, but I'm super happy I read it the first time.
Yeah.
So how about that?
Perfect.
Good. And I would say too, he references a beer festival called the Great Taste of the Midwest. He did a lot of referencing of real places,
Right,
and some not real places. And because I'm from there, I knew which were which. But the Great Taste of the Midwest is a beer festival that is phenomenal in Madison, Wisconsin. It's held at a park overlooking the lake, and you can see the Capitol in the distance. And a really great event. There's, you know, wandering brass bands and, you know, random breweries with swimming pools, and tickets are very hard to get. People camp out for several days at the park in order to get the tickets. At least they used to. Now there's less camping out, and there's more online staggered things. I know we certainly paid some people to camp out for us a time or two, and I've been lucky to go once or twice. But if you ever do plan a trip to the Midwest, guys, plan it around that event.
yeah.
That's
New Glarus Brewing going to be there?
They are generally there. It is the premier beer
right.
festival in the Middle West. That one, and then there's one more held at Three Floyds Brewing down in Indiana.
Yeah.
But that's more of a heavy metal event, so I try to stay away from that.
Because I'll say this raspberry tart, as it's warmed up, has gotten even better.
Yes.
So
5.1 now.
Well, I'm going to go back with what Ryan said. Life changing. This for me.
Yes.
I mean, I don't, like I said, it's as good as any fruit beer I've had. So it's pretty.
Well, I'm going to have to get a Belgian and a raspberry and swap them.
There we go.
So
we'll switch the other way.
You can talk about it.
Well, Talent, thank you for your choice of book this month. Ryan, thank you for the beer. I think someone's going to hear this, and they now have New Glarus Brewing on their list of things to do. And because they heard this, they're going to be in Wisconsin, and they're going to stop at New Glarus, and their life's going to be changed. And in that small way, we have done our job in making the world a better place. If not, isn't it pretty to think so? I always enjoy the conversation, lads. Ryan, your selection next. What are we reading?
My selection next, it is spring, and that means baseball, and that means spring training. 1 year ago this week, I was in Scottsdale at the Milwaukee Brewers spring training. And so the book that we have is called The Cactus League by Emily Nemens. And it's another fiction book. It's about a baseball player who plays for a fictional professional baseball team, the Los Angeles Lions. and something happens. Some secrets about him come out, and he's a star player, but his life goes into some sort of tailspin, I assume. I don't really know. I did read the first
I'm interested. I'm hooked.
few pages, and it actually starts with an older coach who lives in the Scottsdale area, and it hooked me right away. So I hope that we all enjoy it, and the next time we get together, we can talk about a book about baseball while drinking a cold beer and imagining that there's no COVID and we're at spring training again.
There we go.
Salute.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.